I wanted to do a video on Tyson Fury. I'm a big fan of Tyson's, not only as a boxer but also as an entertainer, a soap star, a soap style entertainer, if you like. I think this whole debacle with his fight being called off multiple times. There's been a lot of news about will David Haye retire. There's already been a lot of conspiracy theories. Will he turn up against the Klitschko's? Will there be another fight called with Tyson Fury? All of this sort of chat. And I think one thing that's kind of been overlooked slightly is where this leaves Tyson Fury. What he should do next, what his place is in the heavyweight division without this fight, etc. So I wanted to do a sort of video and express a few thoughts on that. I think it's particularly important to do it now, as Tyson Fury has today expressed on Twitter that he is retiring from the sport. Now, first things first, I'm going to say that I don't necessarily believe that. I think either he's got himself carried away, getting himself in a dire mood after the Haye news, and who can blame him for that, or his Twitter account's been hacked, or most likely he's probably bored and just having a laugh at everyone's expense. But I think with that announcement made this morning that he's looking to retire and hang up his gloves for good, it is worth analysing, where he's at the division, what sort of options are open for him, and really where he could go from here. So, just on the retiring thing, as I said, I don't think he will retire. I think there's too much left for him to do, too much money left for him to be earned. And I think he's probably not being serious about retiring anyway. I think it's probably a joke, or someone on his Twitter account, one of the two. But there are foreseeable reasons that someone in his position would retire. I mean, I've been told, and I've seen this online in a few sources, that Tyson Fury's take for this Haye Fury fight was between £3 and £5 million. Now, first things, what a great job he has done, and Mick Hennessy's job for him, getting a 50-50 split. Tyson Fury is not a pay-per-view fighter on his own, unlike David Haye. He's not got anything like the record or the name of David Haye, and what a great job his team did in getting him that 50-50 split. And with the pay-per-view revenue, with the purses, with the ticket sales, absolutely, 3 to 5 million sounds realistic. But in terms of what he was earning before that, now I read online that his take for the Steve Cunningham fight was $1 million. If you think about it, $1 million, probably about 600 grand. Lose about half of that in terms of tax, and in terms of what he's been giving, having to give his cut to his trainers and managers. That leaves him with about 300k cash. The money, and that was his biggest payday up till now apparently, but the money Fury was going to earn from this fight was huge. It was probably 10 times more at least, if not 20 times more, but at least 10 times more than any other money he'd earned as a boxer. And from here on in, where does he go in terms of earning that money? And the answer to that is nowhere. There isn't really money out there in the world of boxing at the minute that would rival Haye v Fury in terms of the take home. I mean, if we look at his options out there now, a lot of them aren't particularly glamorous. I mean, it's actually hard to pick out a 7-figure payday for him. I guess the only option is the Klitschko, and he's a bit away from one of those. I think the big money comes with pay-per-views. Obviously, pay-per-views make the massive fights happen. And I don't see Tyson Fury versus anyone as a pay-per-view fight unless it's David Haye on the other side of the ring. David Price, maybe that could have been a pay-per-view fight, but not after those 2 losses. Derek Chisora, well, we've already seen that. That's not pay-per-view. Deontay Wilder, I just think neither fighter really has that sort of marquee name, on their record in terms of making it a pay-per-view. And I think representatives from Sky, Eddie Hearn and Johnny Nelson as well, I've also hearing them saying they don't believe there's a pay-per-view fight out there with Fury unless Haye himself is involved. So if we take pay-per-view out of it, that means Fury's going to be not earning anything like the money he was hoping to earn and expecting to earn off the back of this fight. And that could be crippling, for a relatively young man. He's planning on having all that money. He's probably got his spending list of things he wants. He's probably yeah, I know he dropped. I think he said something like £100,000 on his training camp, and it might have put him in a bit of dire straits. He's expecting all of this massive money to come through. Not only has he not got it, but he's now looking at his next payday being vastly reduced, and he's probably going back to fighting for, $500,000 or even less than that, rather than the money he was looking at earning. So I can understand why that would potentially lead him to retire, because he's got his hopes up so much on the big money. And it's not clear that he's ever going to be able to hit those heights again, at all. I mean, in many ways, I think Hay Fury is a bigger fight than than Fury Klitschko. I think even if Fury got himself into the position where he could fight one of the Klitschko brothers, I'm genuinely not sure whether that fight's pay-per-view after Klitschko's recent performance against Povetkin, and I'm genuinely not sure if there's as much money in that fight for Fury as there is in Hay Fury. I think the British public's demand for that fight is so much that Tyson Fury's biggest payday has probably already been and gone, and that's very, very depressing for a man who's still a relatively young man. So I can understand why that would possibly lead him to think retiring. Maybe Mick Hennessy's made him, ran a few names past him, and he's just lost his head when he's seen the amounts of money next to them. I mean, the other thing is, it's been very costly for Tyson in another sense. He was a very well-positioned fighter. He was high up a lot of the governing bodies in terms of rankings, and he's missed a lot of opportunities. So I'm told he could have easily got himself the Kubrat Pulev fight for a final eliminator, but turned that down in order to fight Hay. He slipped down the rankings in a few places. He hasn't kept active, and that sort of thing. So it's cost him a lot, and I can't understand why it's put him in a bad place, and I can't understand why you could foreseeably retire off the back of that. I think the difficulty with Tyson is he's got so much left in front of him. Whilst the money isn't going to be like what it was against Hay, there's still so much money out there for him to earn. There's so much celebrity and legacy for him to achieve, and there's still many, many big fights out there for him. I think with the fact that he's so young, and with the fact that the Klitschkos are so old, there's going to be years and years and years of time for him to stay at the top. There's big fights out there at both British and international level, and I do think there's a lot more to come from Tyson. So I don't think he'll retire, but it's interesting to discuss with his latest statement. So if we assume for one moment that he's not going to retire, and we look at where Tyson is in his career, I think the first thing to mention, and I've made reference to it a few times already, is his age. Tyson Fury is 25 years old, which is absolutely staggering if you consider how far he's come for a heavyweight. And if you consider how young he was when he was getting in the ring with the likes of Derek Chisora, etc. I mean, it's a known fact that heavyweights mature later than any other weight class. But not only that, Fury's not just a heavyweight, he's a massive heavyweight. He's 6'9", 17, 18 stone. This isn't like a blown up cruiserweight, this is a real heavyweight, and we won't be seeing the best of him for another 3-4 years at least, in my opinion. So the fact he's come so far at such a young age, it really is quite telling. And the improvement, in watching him over the last couple of years is absolutely evident. So I still think there's a lot more to come from him. His record is 21 wins, no losses, no draws. He's completely undefeated. 15 of his 21 wins coming by way of knockout. I don't think Fury is the biggest knockout artist, or certainly knockout puncher, which I'll come to later on in this. But that's a very respectable record. 21 fights, 21 wins, 15 knockouts. You can't have any problems with that. In terms of the names on his division, 3 that stand out. Derek Chisora, possibly worth mentioning that Chisora wasn't in the same shape as he was, in his more recent fights where he's looked really decent. But nevertheless, to have that name on your record, European champion, really, really decent form. Kevin Johnson, former Klitschko contender himself. Like, Johnson's lost a few fights. He's lost to Tor Hamer in prize fighter. Fury, obviously Klitschko. He's a decent yardstick. He's a solid sort of top 20, top 30 heavyweight, and that was a good win. And also the stoppage of Steve Cunningham. Again, Steve Cunningham, I know it was contentious, but he lost to Ademic, he lost to Fury. He's a big name because of his cruiserweight exploits. But I mean, these are the 3 names on his record, and that's not bad at all for a fighter. He's 25 years old, and it's certainly a lot bigger names than a lot of the other people on his record. If we look at the big names who David Price has beaten, we're looking at Sexton, McDermott, Skelton. These aren't the level of Fury's fighters. If we look at the names that Deontay Wilder has beaten, I mean, the biggest names Deontay Wilder's beaten, Audley Harrison, maybe. His last fight was against Nikolai Furfa, who Tyson Fury beat several years ago. So I think Fury's record is decent. You can make a few gripes that some of the names on there aren't the strongest, but I'd suggest they're a lot stronger than the likes of his compatriots David Price and Deontay Wilder. If we look at his style, there's a lot of pros to Tyson Fury. He's got a very underrated jab, in my opinion. Obviously, being such a good guy, a big guy, having a great jab is absolutely imperative, and his jab is something that's really come on since I've started watching him over the past few years. It's a really decent weapon, and he's one of these fighters. He's got great inside skills and great outside skills. Certainly, inside skills are great. I don't know if I should say he's got great inside skills actually, but he's got very, very underrated inside skills and strong inside skills for such a big man. He does work the body. He's got slight variety to his punching. I mean, in terms of Klitschko Povetkin, I think there was a stat that Klitschko didn't throw a single body punch that whole fight. Every time it got inside, Klitschko held. Fury is a bit more versatile than that. He does work the body. He's got uppercuts. He's got hooks. He can get into a scrap inside. He's not just someone who holds. Now, he has got that big man style like Klitschko. You saw how he dominated, kind of totally wore him down, got on top of him, got on his chest, bullied him around the ring. So I think he's got a good combination. He can use those sort of big man aggressive bullying tactics if he needs to. He's got strong inside game. He's got variety to his punching. He's got an excellent jab. He can fight inside. He can fight outside. He's really, really decent. Technically, he's not bad. His hand speed is quite good for a man of his size. He's got combination punching. His footwork's decent. He can fight southpaw. He can mix it up a bit. He's quite, he's really, really quite decent for a bigger man. He's certainly a lot more technically gifted, in my opinion, than the likes of David Price and Deontay Wilder. And I use those two examples as they're both, young heavyweights supposedly on the rise. Both of them at sort of similar stages to Tyson Fury in their careers. I think in terms of technical ability, he's better than both of those guys. I think his jab is better than both of those guys. I think his inside game is a lot better than both of those guys. I think his footwork and his ring generalship is better than both of those guys. So I quite rate him on that front. I gave him quite a good chance of beating David Haye. And I think the blueprint to that was his performance against Kevin Johnson. Now, a lot of people criticised him for that performance and booed him, but I think that was Fury's best ever performance. In my opinion, he hardly lost a round in that fight. It's very possible to score every round in that fight in Fury's favour. It possibly wasn't the most entertaining fight, but that was largely Kevin Johnson's fault. He was turned into a defensive shell. He didn't want to engage. He didn't seem to want to get knocked out, so he spent a lot of time on the ropes and trying not to be hit. And the fact it was a slightly boring fight at time wasn't Fury's fault. But what he did provide was a bit of a masterclass. His jab was consistent. He threw combinations. He was so dominant in that fight, and that is the way to beat someone like David Haye. David Haye, I'm a huge fan of David Haye. I've seen David Haye fight live several times. I've watched all his fights. I think he's a great guy. I'm a massive fan of his. But where David Haye is not at his best is against a tall man. You look at the way he fought. I was delighted when he beat Valiev, but I thought Valiev won that fight. I thought David Haye was too nervy against a taller man, too nervy about engaging. He was more like getting in and getting out rather than having a toe-to-toe fight. And it's the same with Klitschko. Against that taller man, he actually wasn't good, or as good as he can be. Where David Haye is really decent is against a Derek Chisora-style opponent. He's similar height. He can, throw more power punches. He seems less nervy. Against like a John Ruiz or a John Ruiz or a Derek Chisora, he looked really at his best, in my opinion. Even Audley Harrison, dare I say, and I know that was mismatch of the century, but the first 2 rounds, Hay fought like he does against taller opponents to him. He's a bit cagier, staying on the outside a bit more, ambushing it. It just seems a bit out of his comfort zone against taller guys. And I thought that fact about David Hay, combined with sort of Fury's performance against Johnson, I thought there was a real high probability that fight was not going to turn into the most entertaining matchup, and instead could be a 12-round fight that left the fans thoroughly disappointed, with Fury winning conclusively on points just by using the jab, keeping the fight at range. When they get in close, Fury's got inside game and you're roughing him up like he did against Steve Cunningham. So I think I made Fury a very, very decent chance in that fight. Obviously, with David Hay's power and with Fury's ability to take a punch, which is something I was planning to come on to, there was always a risk he was going to get stopped and knocked out. So I'm not saying that Fury would have definitely won, but I think that was a 50-50 fight in my opinion. So all in all, in terms of what's going for Tyson Fury, great jab, good inside game for a big man, great sort of big man tactics, good combination punching, good hand speed for a larger guy, good footwork, tactically very good, like against Kevin Johnson, didn't get sucked into a war, really showed quite a lot of class, boxing class in my opinion in that fight. I think there's a lot going for him. His age as well, 25 years old for a man of that size. He's got a lot going for him. In terms of the cons for Tyson Fury, he can be hit. He's vulnerable to a looping overhand right. If we look at the 2 times he's gone down in his career, Nevin Piketts, Steve Cunningham, neither of these guys are known as big punchers. Neither of them can punch anywhere near as hard as David Hay. Neither of them are big men in the same sense that Fury is. Both of them through multiple looping, wild overhand rights. You look at that Piketts fight and look at the Cunningham fight. The amount of times these fellas are swinging with this looping right hand is almost constant. Piketts is throwing it every second punch. It makes me think that their trainers have sat down, watched him, and realised Tyson Fury is vulnerable to that punch. And yes, it's true. He can be hit with it. He did well, he got put down badly in both of those fights. However, at both times, he was knocked down but not knocked out. He didn't look all over the place. It's difficult. They were heavy knockdowns, but he didn't look like the fight was going to be stopped, in my opinion. He was almost more sort of knocked off balance and just sort of knocked off his feet. But I think he knew where he was, is what I'm trying to say. I think his head was clearer than you'd think. But against someone like David Hay, if David Hay is clocking any heavyweight globally with his right hand haymaker numerous times, it's going to be game over. So Tyson Fury can be hit. He's not the best defensive fighter at this stage. Is he chinny? It's hard to say. He's been punched and been down, but as I say, both times he's impressed me by the fact that he's got straight back up again and hasn't looked like he was going to get stopped. So I think it's harsh to call him chinny, but he can be knocked down. My only other concern with Tyson Fury, and this is perhaps one that isn't shared by a lot of the public, especially if you consider his record is 21-0 with 15 knockouts. I'm not 100% sure about his power. He doesn't seem to carry the devastating knockout power of some of his rivals. I would certainly say he's a weaker puncher than Deontay Wilder, David Price, David Hay. These are all bigger single punch knockout artists in my opinion. Now don't get me wrong, Fury can bang. He's knocked out 15 of his 21 opponents. His knockout of Cunningham, there was a bit of a foul there, wasn't there? He kind of pulled his head back with a forearm and then sort of teed up the right hand. So he knocked him spark out, but there was some question over that one. And a lot of his fights, he's more sort of worn opponents down rather than absolutely sparking them out. And I wonder, against someone a bit classier, a bit more elusive, whether he'll be able to land multiple shots. You know, he needs to carry more weight. I mean, someone like Price, Hay, Wilder, you know, Deontay Wilder against any heavyweight in the world has a very good chance, because if he connects, they are going down. Wilder Klitschko, Wilder Hay, Wilder Fury, you know, I'm not a big Deontay Wilder fan. I think there's big flaws to his game. I think he's technically very weak. I think his footwork is dreadful. But with that power he carries, he can knock any man out. If he was losing a fight, he's always dangerous. Tyson Fury doesn't, at this stage, appear to carry that same single one-punch knockout power to completely change the course of a fight. So, I'm weighing up the pros and weighing up the cons. The cons are, he can be hit. There's a question over his chin. There's a question over his power. Having said that, I'm still a massive Tyson Fury fan. I think there's a lot more going for him than there is against him. And I still think he could go very, very far in this sport. In terms of his next fights, Deontay Wilder's the obvious one. He's calling Deontay out very aggressively for February the 8th. We'll have to see whether or not that happens. As I say, I don't know whether or not. My instinct is that won't go pay-per-view if it does happen. So we'll have to see if the fighters are keen to proceed on that basis. But one thing I can say is the winner of that fight puts himself right in line for a Klitschko shot. It's hard to see the person who wins that fight not getting a Klitschko shot. So that's why it is beneficial. Deontay Wilder obviously carries massive power, which is always a threat. But arguably it is an easier fight than David Hay. I mean, you look at that Wilder Hay sparring session, and Hay just seemed to be owning him with his movement, seemed to be able to hit him at will. I think Hay would knock out Wilder very easily if they fought, and I don't think Fury's got that elusiveness, that sort of bobbing and weaving style Hay has. I don't think his head movement is quite as good, so I don't think he could counterpunch and ambush Wilder to the same extent. But I do think that I do think Wilder's got less class than Hay, certainly. So I think it's an interesting fight. Problems is it will be very difficult for Fury to come back if he loses it, and it's not going to be as much money and as much glamour as if he fought David Hay. So yeah, that one's out there. We'll have to see whether or not that one happens. I think it's a 50-50 fight. I think Fury's the better man technically. Fury wins if it goes to points, but just with Deontay's power and with Fury's, Fury being you can hit Fury, certainly. It's a 50-50 fight. Do you have other options out there? Derek Chisora, he's making a name for himself at the minute. Could he be a good fight? Does Fury want to fight for the European title? Does he want to fight Chisora again? I don't really see that fight happening. In many ways, it's a no-win fight for Fury. If he beats Chisora, well, he's already done that. If he loses, it's a huge setback. David Price recently signed with Sauerland. Could he, they've said that they want to take him on a sort of world tour, fighting on their undercards for a year before a big return. I think it's unlikely that fight looks like happening. So I think the most realistic one is probably Deontay Wilder. There are a few other names out there: Stiverne, Tony Thompson, maybe Kubrat Pulev, but I think Stiverne's going to wait for Vitali. I think Pulev is most likely going to try and get a final eliminator with Derek Chisora or something to that effect. So it's hard to see where his next fight's coming from. I think if Tyson's looking for the money, if Tyson's looking to get himself a title shot immediately, Wilder is the best option. But I think it's a very, very dangerous fight for him, and there are a lot of other easier opponents out there. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see where he goes. It'd be very interesting. But to summarise, I think there's a lot more going for him. You've got to take into account his age and all of the advantages he has, and just think how good he could be in 3 or 4 years' time. But I'd be interested to hear people's thoughts. Do you think he will retire? What do you think his next move will be? Who would be the best matchup for him? And where does he go from here, really? What are people's thoughts? Please leave your comments below. Thanks for watching.